Welcome to the 40th reading of my memoir, The Innocence of Guilt. The job search. At school, things were winding down. Soon we would all be dispersed into the workforce, and the question looming in our minds was where and how we would earn our keep. Different teachers escorted us around several factories and service businesses in town. None of them had any positive impact on me. One factory looked like another, noisy hubbubs of frenetic human activity. By the time my last school day arrived and I had filled up the autograph album David kindly gave me for a school leaving present, with teachers and girls' names, I was no farther along the road to employment. I sadly walked up the slope, plucked a leaf from the hedge at the top to put in the album as a symbolic gesture, and sauntered home alone, not even bothering to check for the bullies. No school leaving certificate, only 12 thin 6 by 8 inch exercise books as proof I had been to secondary school for 4 years. The maths exercise books had been ripped up by me when kicked out of maths class. At home, I couldn't escape the fact that I wasn't a school child anymore. My adult life loomed, although I had no idea how I would live it. In celebration of my new status, Dad paid somebody from the factory to partition off part of the large bedroom he and Mum shared so I could have a room of my own. It pleased me to have a private space at last, albeit small, but the window in the partition, letting in light from their room, was sealed. Dad said not to close the door or I would suffocate, but I took my chances on that. No point to having a room of my own if I couldn't have any privacy. That I couldn't swim bothered me more than getting a job. My project for the summer: learn how to swim. On Saturdays, I took myself off to the outdoor swimming pool, handed over my pocket money, changed into my swimming costume, and slipped gingerly into the cold water of the small baby pool where the water came a little way past my knees, the only level I could tolerate without panicking. I devised an innovative system to teach myself how to swim. You wouldn't find it in any how to swim manual, but it worked for me. No quick plunges into the deep end, but a slow, gradual exposure to the scary body of water entrusted with my life. First, I lay down in the shallow baby pool and touched the comforting solidness of the concrete bottom with my hands, propelling myself along. I soon suffered raw fingertips, the way my brother did from learning the guitar. Not to be discouraged, I bought a packet of sticking plasters and put one on each of my fingers and thumbs every time I went into the pool. Gradually, I gained courage to move out of the baby pool into the 3 feet pool, where my next stage of training took place. I positioned myself a body's length away from the edge and struck out to aim for it. The first frantic attempts left me gasping in the water, heart racing as if I'd escaped from a shark, but I repeated the exercise over and over until I grew comfortable with the idea of letting myself go. The first time I swam a couple of strokes, doggy paddle, I couldn't have been more happy than if I'd swum across the English Channel. I taught myself to do the breaststroke, but I never managed the overarm or floating on my back. I accepted my limitations. Mum's project for the summer: to find me a job. She asked me what I fancied, and I told her I wanted to be a hairdresser. My first choice was to work in one of the ladies' dress shops in the High Street, or the interesting bookshop in Crouch Street, but I knew those involved making monetary exchanges using one of the huge manual tills, so I went for the safest thing. A few hairdressers' shops in town took apprentices. A hairdressing school existed too, but because of the fees, that was out of the question, so off we went to check out all the shops. I held back and let Mum do the talking, which didn't do much for my cause. Only one shop appeared interested in having me, but my main concern was the till. The first thing you saw when you entered the shop, it sat on the top of a high desk, as if more important than the actual hairdressing. I wouldn't agree to working there until Mum posed the all-important question, and the woman in charge said of course I had to use the till, and that did it for me. The fear of giving change overpowered me. I would never be a hairdresser. Mum stretched her imagination and ingenuity further afield. If left up to me, I would have stayed at home, denying the necessity of working for my keep. My parents probably thought me lazy, but it was more a case of fear and a lack of self-awareness, mixed in with low self-esteem and no work experience whatsoever, that prevented me from doing what most girls my age accepted easily. I was totally out of my depth, and not only at the swimming pool. We ended up at the Bypass Plant Nursery, a short walk north of the town centre. Mum, with her green thumb, thought I would take to tending plants too, in the serene atmosphere of the rows upon rows of greenhouses and outdoor gardens. The place was peaceful, and I seriously imagined myself working there until I visualized the worms hiding in the soil. My brother used to terrify me after a rainfall by going outside the back door, grabbing handfuls of the slimy creatures and throwing them into the scullery at me. He once chased me for several blocks with worms, but never caught me. Nothing, not even spiders, freaked me out more than worms. Desperate to get me employed and off her hands, Mum downplayed the worm aspect, but I couldn't get it out of my mind. I asked the lady at the nursery if I could wear gloves so as not to touch the worms, and she looked at me the way a nurse looks at a small child about to get their first needle at the health clinic. "You'll get used to them," she said, assuming her reassuring words comforted me, but they didn't. As Mum and the lady discussed when I would start my relationship with the worms, I tore out of there as fast as I could, and when she caught up with me, she clearly wasn't pleased. I'd let her down again, but I didn't like being coerced into something I found difficult. A few days later, we found our way to Mason's, a bookbinder's factory, for an interview. Mum believed this time she'd found a winner, as I read books the way I ate cheese sandwiches, voraciously. Accompanied by the clacking and whirring of machinery, the interview went well until I asked if I would get to read any of the books. A frown appeared on the lady interviewer's face. Obviously not an appropriate question, but we left the factory with my future decided. I would be starting work there the following Monday morning. On Friday, Mum casually said, "Don't forget, tomorrow you're going to the hairdresser's to get your hair cut before you start at Mason's." I looked at her in horror. "What do you mean, get my hair cut?" I'd been growing it for 2 years. I wore it in a ponytail and loved the way it swished back and forth when I walked along. Mum looked at me as if I was playing dumb. "Don't you remember the lady saying you couldn't have your hair long in case it got caught in the cutting machines?" "No, I didn't hear her say that," I replied. "Well, she did, and you can't have been paying attention, so you know what you have to do." "I'm not getting my hair cut," I yelled. "I'm afraid, young lady, that you'll have to if you want that job." Too much for me. I promptly took myself upstairs, to my cupboard of a bedroom and bawled my eyes out all night long as if I'd been handed a sentence of execution. In the morning, my eyelids were so swollen I could barely see through them, but I managed to stare into the mirror and see what a mess I looked. I refused to go to the hairdresser's in such a state, so I couldn't turn up at Mason's on Monday morning. Another job down the drain. A position as a daily nanny to 2 small children turned up in the newspaper ads, and as Mum had taken an identical position at my age, she thought this must be something I could do. This time I obediently hopped on my bike as it was too far for Mum to walk with me. At the country house, the mother greeted me a little warily. She soon realized my inability to take care of her precious children and quickly sent me on my way. Not even a glass of water after cycling all that way in the heat. Mum had to think again. My choices were getting narrower and narrower. My next interview took place in the basement office of an accounting company. To this day, I have no idea what prompted my mother to agree to such an interview. She must have been desperate to have remotely considered the idea of me sitting at a desk adding up numbers in a ledger. I sat down on the stool provided me by a stern-faced man and stared at the columns of figures in the long book. My worst nightmare come true. The worms and having to get my hair cut short had nothing on that. I couldn't add the numbers up to save my life, yet I passed the interview, and Mum expected me to take the job. She must have bribed the man. All the way home I argued with her, but she wouldn't listen. Obviously so fed up with me, she was prepared to see me tortured for the rest of my life. No other explanation. Of course I refused to turn up for the job, and there was nothing she could do to persuade me, but by then my father had entered the final act of this pathetic drama. He directed the next move. My orders were to show up at W.O. Peak's, the clothing factory, where Dad worked, the following Monday morning. No arguments, no backing out, no interview required, no particular skills needed, nothing but my body on the premises. They would teach me everything I needed to do the job I didn't want but was forced to take. My dad said I'd wasted enough of Mum's valuable time. He wasn't going to feed, clothe, or house me anymore. Time I grew up, got off my backside, and brought some money into the house. The last thing I wanted was to rely on my father's influence to get me a job, but I hadn't seen it coming, how he would force my hand that way. I might toy a bit with my mother's will, but I knew better than to try it on with his. I couldn't afford to be hungry, naked, and homeless, so I reluctantly agreed to the arrangement. Thank you for listening. Please feel free to subscribe, like, or comment on this reading, and hopefully you will tune in to the next one. Bye for now.